Hi, Narrate. If you don't have a little one, you may not know that Gay and her team do such a great job in the nursery. Gay serves families, moms, and our littlest kiddos so well. That being said, we have many newborns and babies on the way in our Narrate family, and Gay would love some extra hands in the nursery in the upcoming months. If you are interested in volunteering in the nursery, maybe you'd like to shadow one Sunday morning to see what volunteering is like, or if you have any questions, please reach out to Gay. She'd love to get you connected. Thanks.
Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." And then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly. And he thought to himself, "What should I do, for I have no place to store my crops?" And then he said, "I will do this. I will put down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and all my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God.'"
Thanks, Jack. I don't know about you, but this story makes me a little uncomfortable. It makes me uncomfortable because it brings up thoughts about my stuff and possessions and things that I own. And then there's this weird line at the end about something about death and our time is not our own, and it's really uncomfortable. I started a book on parables a couple weeks ago in preparation for this morning, and I love how the author kind of sets the stage for parables. And she says, "Religion has been defined as designed to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. We do well to think of the parables of Jesus as doing the afflicting. Therefore, if we hear a parable and we think, 'I really like that,' or worse, fail to take any challenge, we are not listening well enough." So I think if we just read that together and went, "Ooh, I don't love that," or "I'm really uncomfortable," I think that's okay. We've got a challenge set for us this morning. There's a really great podcast by John Mark Comer, and this is where I got the title for this morning, The Myth of More. And he says, "The human heart has long been prone to believe the myth of more. If I just had a little bit more, then I would be happy. If I just had a little bit more money, then I'd be happy. If I just had a little bit newer truck, then I'd be happy. If I just had a few more vacation days, then I would be happy." But what is this parable saying? How might this parable warn us against greed and the idea that the acquisition of possessions or getting a lot of stuff is the pinnacle of life? And what if focusing on possessions for ourselves, for oneself, leads to an impoverishment with God? So we live in the most affluent era of human history. That is true. And I get there's kind of a weird cultural moment happening where it's like stuff is all of a sudden more expensive than it was a few years ago, and our budgets are a little bit tighter, but we still live in a very affluent time in history. I was reminded of an interaction I had in 2014. I spent 6 months in Kenya, and I would have been 23 years old, and I was teaching at a vocational school, and the students were like 18 years old, so I became good friends with a lot of them. And one afternoon, a girl, Jasmine, who was one of my good friends, she looked at me and she went, "Hannah, you wear a different shirt every day. How many shirts do you have?" And she wasn't like trying to be mean or rude. She was just really curious, like, why does she have so many shirts? And so I didn't want to come across as the greedy American, and I completely lowballed my answer, and I said, "Oh, I have 10 shirts." And she looked at me and went, "Whoa. You're rich." And I don't remember what I said to her. It was probably just awkward and weird. But what I was thinking was, oh my gosh, like I have more than that here, like in my closet in Nairobi. But furthermore, I'm going to leave most of that here, and I did leave a lot of my clothes to the girls at the school. Like, I'm going to leave all that here because when I go home, like, I've got more outfits than I know what to do with. And that, for me, kind of really challenged me about how I think about my stuff and my possessions. We've got a lot of stuff. So to start us off, we have some fun facts. I love a good fun fact. So let's think about the size of American homes. What do you think the average American home, square footage-wise, was in 1950? Does anyone have a guess? Oh my goodness, you're so close. It's 900. Good job, Jerry. It's about 900 square feet. Today, it's about 2,500 square feet. So in about 60, 70 years, we have about tripled the size of our homes, while our family size has decreased quite a bit. How about the self-storage market? What do you think the self-storage market in the U.S. is worth? I didn't even know what to guess. It's $45 billion. I did some math for this, and so this is all Google, so don't quote me in your professional paper this week. This is me and Google for 20 minutes, but $45 billion in the U.S. The global self-storage market is about $60 billion. The U.S. population is 4.5% of the global population. We're about 70% of the global self-storage market. We've got a lot of crap. And I'm not judging you if you have a storage unit. It's fine, I've been there too. But we got a lot of stuff. Okay, one more fun fact. I don't know if you're familiar with the minimalists. I'm more of a Marie Kondo kind of person. Spark joy, anyone? Yes, okay, good. But their fun fact is the average American home contains over 300,000 items. I was looking at my jigsaw puzzle collection this week, and I was wondering if they counted like individual pieces or like the puzzle as the whole. And I was like, I think I have a problem. I'm part of the problem. So we've got a lot of stuff. We have a lot of room for our stuff. There are whole industries based around storing our stuff. So let's get into this parable and think critically about greed and the myth of more. So we enter into this interaction. Jesus is present. There's this man present, and there's probably 1,000 or more in the crowd around him. And this man asks a question about inheritance. And that's not uncommon. Like rabbis would have been asked to weigh in on something like this. But Jesus doesn't really give him a straight answer, but he uses this opportunity to warn the crowd. He says, take care. Be on guard against all kinds of greed. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. And so he launches into this story about a rich man, and he had all this grain and stuff, and he didn't have anywhere to put it. So he tore down his barns, he built bigger ones, and he's like, sweet, I got all this stuff. I'm going to hang out, eat, drink, be merry. And up until this point, I'm like, this guy's awesome. Like, that sounds great. Sign me up. But then God says to him, you fool. This very night, your life is being demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, well, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. So that verse kind of strikes a nerve. I have a lot of questions right now, like, what did this guy do wrong? How do we live richly toward God? A few weeks ago, when we were talking about parables and asked some questions about parables, I've been reading them a bit differently and thinking, well, what does this story tell me about God's kingdom and how I'm supposed to live if I'm a part of God's kingdom? So what does this tell you about some values that God's kingdom has? I'd like to go back to the warnings. Take care. Be on your guard against all kinds of what? Greed? There's more than one kind? Let's talk a little bit about greed for a second. So greed is the strong, selfish desire for more stuff, more wealth, more power, usually more than we need, and it's often at the expense of someone else. It's this insatiable desire for more than we have, maybe more than we need, or it's a lack of satisfaction with what we currently have. John Mark Comer adds, I like what he adds to the definition of greed. Greed is like lust, but for things. Greed is the objectification of another person or thing for your own personal pleasure. And we are all vulnerable to some version of greed. It's interesting because if you look at the parables, Jesus teaches more about money and possessions than any other topic. But very few of us would think that we're greedy. It wouldn't be on the list of things I'd confess. In this podcast, John Mark Comer talks about he's been a pastor for over 20 years. And so in those 20 years, people have confessed things to him like infidelity and domestic violence and all sorts of like addictions and substance abuses. And he was saying, you know what's the one conversation I have never had? No one has ever come to me and confessed greed. Like no one's ever gone to him and said, you know what? I just bought this new truck that I cannot afford. Help me figure out how to get out of this. He's like, I've never had that conversation. And I think that's because it's such a part of our culture. Like we adapt to the spending norms and the consumer trends of what's around us, and it just appears normal now. One of my favorite parts of studying and following Jesus is looking at the parables and looking at what he's teaching. And then if you don't know, I have a degree in psychology and sociology, so then I love to look at like modern social sciences and see how Jesus' teaching shows up in modern day social sciences. It's like Jesus understood human behavior and mental processes. It's amazing. So there's something called, it's a psychological concept called the hedonic treadmill. It's based on this idea of hedonism, that humans are supposed to seek out pleasure and happiness, and it's all about you and feeling good. So the hedonic treadmill is this idea that when a positive thing in our life happens, like we get a raise at work or we take an awesome vacation, there's this bump in our level of happiness. Like we feel happier. And so because we like feeling happier, we start to pursue those things that make us feel happy. We'll pursue more stuff or money or more vacations or whatever it is. But because we're also adaptable creatures, what was once new and exciting and shiny just becomes the norm or every day. And we return to this kind of baseline level of happiness pretty quickly. And just like running on a treadmill, we don't really get anywhere and we don't really increase the satisfaction of our lives much. I think I get that's one thing, but I think it's also relevant in other situations. Like we spent some time in Croatia this summer with some friends, and if you've been to Europe, everything's so old. Like the architecture's so old, it's really cool. And so our first few days, we're going on different hikes, and there's all these old churches everywhere. And you're like, whoa, there's a church in a cliff, and it's from like the 900s, and there's another one built by this guy, and that's so cool, and it's from like the 1200s. And then it doesn't take very long before you're just kind of strolling down the street, and you're like, another old church, I don't really care, whatever. Just these things that are cool become really everyday and kind of mundane really quickly. This shows up in the text all over. I love this verse. The lover of money will not be satisfied with money, nor the lover of wealth with gain. And this is also vanity. Let's talk about different types of greed. Jesus references there's a couple kinds of greed. So we're just going to talk about 4, although I think there's a lot more. The first one is pretty obvious: material possessions and money. It's pretty obvious, I think, because it's so common, right? We just want more stuff, more money for ourselves. I think that also plays into something like power and status. We want more recognition or influence for ourselves. Again, that one's pretty like flashy and obvious. But there's a few more types of greed that are more subtle, and I like to call this one the greed of delicacy or just rightness. Now, hear me out on this one. I was researching kinds of greed, and C.S. Lewis was super helpful in this. Went back to his book, The Screwtape Letters. And if you don't know what The Screwtape Letters is, it's a book written by the perspective of a demon. So again, and I think we've talked about this before, you have to read it like upside down because it's from the opposite perspective. But it's letters written by this demon, and he's talking about how to like kind of influence people. And there's this whole chapter about this man's mom. And she's a terror. Like, she has lost friends, she has lost staff, she shows up at a restaurant and waitresses don't want to help her because everything has to be done just properly right. And the example in the book is like her tea has to be weak, but not too weak, and it has to be hot, but like not so hot she can't drink it, but it better not be lukewarm. The power, this greed of just rightness. Here's a quote. Her properly, right? Everything has to be done to perfection. Her properly conceals an insatiable demand. That's part of greed, right? An insatiable demand for the exact and almost impossible palatable pleasures which she imagines she remembers from the past. Her greed has been one of the chief sources of her son's domestic discomfort for many years. I think this kind of greed is really subtle, and I also think it's kind of like cool and socially acceptable. So what I mean by that is, like, I've had people ask, I can't think of a specific conversation, but people have asked, oh, how was that new brewery you went to? Or how was that new restaurant you went to? And I rarely say, like, awesome. I'm always like, oh, it was a little loud, like, did their music a little loud, and I couldn't, like, hear. I just wanted to go have a conversation. Like, all I want to do is have a conversation. I couldn't hear anything. Or, like, the lights were too dim. Are they trying to save on electricity? What are we doing? Like, and then I got my drink, and it just wasn't how I like it. And my burger wasn't cooked just right, the exact rightness. It has to be just so. Or I was like thinking about this stuff this week, and I literally the other day I was standing in my house and I was like, if that wall could just be like moved this way, then I could have room for more plants right here, and then it could just be like perfect and I'd be happy. This exact rightness. Okay. Final type of greed we're going to talk about this morning, although I think there's a lot more, is control over our time. And I put "our" in quotes because it's not really our time. Our time is a gift from God. Again, the Screwtape Letters and C.S. Lewis speak to this kind of greed. Remember, the demon is writing this. So nothing throws him into a passion so easily as to find attractive time, which he reckoned on having at his own disposal, unexpectedly taken from him. Ooh, it makes me so cranky when this happens to me. This angers him because he regards his time as his own and feels that it is being stolen. Therefore, you must zealously guard in his mind this curious assumption that my time is my own. My time. I'm going to spend my time how I want. And this one ties right back into that really confusing and uncomfortable end of our parable. Because God reminds this guy, like, you fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you. And all the things that you have prepared, whose will they be? I think greed is more than these surface level or really flashy, obvious kinds of greed. I think it's an insatiable desire for fill in the blank, more beauty, more vacation days, more time, whatever, right? If I just had a little bit more fill in the blank, what is that for you? So what do we do with this? You didn't think you were greedy when you walked in, and now you're all kinds of greedy. That's how I felt this week. Like, oh, man. What do we do with this? What does this tell us about God's kingdom? What does this tell us about the values that we're to live out if we want to be a part of God's kingdom? I think a pretty natural response is to talk about generosity, and we're not going to do that this morning because there's a 4-part series in September that Adam's going to do about generosity, so we can look forward to that. But I think something like contentment might be worth thinking about. How do we practice and learn to be content, like in all and any circumstances, with who we are right now and where we're at right now and with what we have right now? And there's really no hack or trick for this. It's really just showing up every day and choosing to live with a grateful and content spirit. I like to think about simplicity as well. I started to think of not what do I need or what do I want, but what can I live without? Do I need, do I want that new blazer or that new jacket? Yeah. Could I live without it? Yeah, probably. Do I need the latest iPhone or a newer car? Sure, I want it, but could I live without it? Yeah. And so I think we might do well to think about simplifying our lives and ask ourselves, what can we live without? If you look at your schedule, I'm guessing it's crammed full. Where might we create margin in our lives? If you look at your phone, if you look at my phone, you have to scroll 5 pages over to get anywhere. Do we have so many apps? Could we simplify that way? What could we get rid of? What could we sell? Just think about simplifying our lives. I think I always go back, though, to this meta-narrative that we see in the text. Like, how does Jesus treat people, right? How do we value people? Jesus loves and values the people around him. So I like to think about, how do we use this and value people? So I think it's because Jack's reading this morning that I was reminded of this interaction that my husband and I had at his birthday party a while ago. And it was a couple years ago, and I'm sorry, I don't remember what number of birthday it was. But we got invited to this birthday party at Lewis and Clark, and we showed up, and we're just hanging out, having a good time. There's a couple of us at a table, and his family member walked up to us and said, "Hey, thanks so much for being here." And we were like, "Yeah, of course, no big deal." And she goes, "No, really. Like, you showed up, and that's a big deal. You showed up to celebrate Jack." And so often, and then she went on, and I can't remember exactly what she said, but the idea was, like, we often, like, get to a funeral, and then we go, "Oh, man, we share stories and memories, and that's great." But did they know how we felt about them when they were here? Like, did we celebrate them when we were here? Did we create memories and have experiences? Like, do they know? Like, do the people around us know we love them and celebrate them? And I was like, wow, lady, this got really dark really quickly. Thanks. So in the moment, it was a bit like, oh my goodness, this is awkward. But it's one of those things that just stuck with us. And Scott and I kind of reference a lot. Like, one of our values as a couple is just say yes and show up. Like, say yes and be there. And it really comes from this interaction we had. Like, how do we celebrate people? How do we love people? Like, right here and right now. And again, there's no, like, hack or trick. It's just every day waking up and choosing to, like, be present with the people you're with. Celebrate people and love people now. Because what we learn from this parable is not even our time is our own. And as we kind of wrap up and we're moving towards communion this morning, I want you to make a fist with your hand. Just make a fist. Keep it to yourself. Don't share it with your neighbor. Look at your fist. I think greed is kind of like a fist because it causes us to close in and draw in and look inward at ourselves, like my time, my money, my possessions. And I think Jesus is calling us to, like, open our hands. Open your hand. And I think he's calling us to look outward and look at other people. Maybe you've got a lot of stuff. Great. How can you use it to bless someone? Maybe you've got a lot of money. Great. Some people need money. Maybe you've got a lot of time. How might you use your time to value people? Maybe you have power and status and influence in our community. Great. We need people in power who care about and love the people that they're serving. So we're going to kind of move into a space of communion and reflection, and I just want to leave you with a couple of questions. What version of greed are you vulnerable to? And maybe it's not one we talked about, right? It's just this insatiable desire for, or just a little bit more fill in the blank. What version of greed are you vulnerable to? What version of greed is God, like, tapping you on the shoulder going, hey, pay attention to that? And how might God release you from that form of greed and flip it upside down and kind of use that to value people? How might you turn outward and love and celebrate the people that are around you here and right now? So we're going to enter into communion. If you've not taken communion with us and you're wondering if you're welcome, you are more than welcome. If you believe in Jesus, you're more than welcome to take communion with us. That being said, if you don't want to, you're not comfortable, no worries. That is just fine. There's bread up here. There's gluten-free if you need that. Just let them know. There's wine and juice over here. They'll just default to wine. Let them know if you need juice. And we'll go through row by row. Hang on to it, and I'm going to get up and lead us through communion when we're done. So I'd like to pray, let the band and ushers kind of get settled. God, we thank you for this challenge that you've presented to us, this challenge of thinking critically about our stuff and our possessions and our time. It's hard, but we thank you that we might be able to use these things to value others. How might we value other people that we come in contact with in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods, in our families? We just ask that you guide us in how you want us to treat people. We love you. Amen.
If you'd like to learn more about Narrate Church, find us online at narratechurch.org.
You can also look us up on Facebook or Instagram. Thanks for listening.